Usually, we don't have a lot of contact with wild animals. If you're not a pet owner or live on a farm, the animals you get to see on a regular basis might be birds, your neighbor's dogs, or your friend's cat. On the other hand, some people's way of living permits them to get to know many different species up close. However, one girl had an incredible chance to grow up alongside gorillas. Her name is Tansy Espinal, and she got to experience something few people on Earth had a chance to feel. She decided to come back to the facility in the hope that her huge animal friends would recognize her when she finally saw them again. Something incredible happened. Watch on to reveal Tansy's beautiful story and to learn how their meeting unfolded. Tansy Espinal didn't really have an ordinary childhood. When she was a kid, her parents owned and operated a facility that rehabilitated captive gorillas. The goal of the facility was to one day get the gorillas back to their West African homeland. As you can imagine, Tansy's youngest years passed in such a different manner than most of her friends. She had fulfilled days in the facility with her gorilla friends, and surely to her, the world seemed like a perfect place. However, Tansy had the opportunity to live with gorillas because of her parents. Her father, Damien Espinal, the founder of the facility, lived to rehabilitate captive gorillas and help them lead a better life once they were released back to the wild. Damien had a very specific way of approaching gorillas. He insisted that all his staff and his daughter as well would interact closely with the wild animals. Although this method worked pretty well most of the time in the 80s and 90s, 5 employees were accidentally killed by the animals due to misunderstood communication. Despite these accidental attacks that ended fatally, the gorillas at Espinal's facility were quite calm. Most of the encounters and interactions Damien had with gorillas were very touching and life-changing. Tansy spent a lot of time with the gorillas when she was still a toddler. Although she was clumsy and didn't have coordinated movements, the gorillas realized that she was only a vulnerable kid and bonded closely with her. When Espinal's gorilla troop, made up of 10 gorillas, was rehabilitated, it was finally time for them to go back into the wild. They had to be released into the jungles of Gabon. Luckily for the gorillas, before being released, they were kept on a river island for a couple of months to learn to defend themselves in the wild. When the day for the gorillas to leave finally came, Tansy and her father were sad to see them nervously walk away into a jungle they didn't recognize anymore. They eventually disappeared into the jungle and started leading new lives in the surroundings they deserved a long time ago. Tansy grew up to be a beautiful woman. Now that she turned 25, she wished to meet her childhood friends. So she and her father decided to go to Gabon, where they would reunite with the gorillas they had raised for such a long time. The 2 gorillas Tansy bonded with the most were named Julta and Bims, and 12 years had passed since Tansy last saw them. However, she and her father, Damien, didn't expect that something else might happen on their journey to Gabon. Damien Espinal had previously returned over 80 gorillas to the wild, and he had experience with returning gorillas to their homeland. But these 2 gorillas were a bit particular. They belonged to a big family group that was released altogether. This was a big experiment in animal rehabilitation, which is why the results of their reintroduction to the wildlife weren't really easy to forecast. So, Tansy decided to travel to Gabon to meet the 2 gorillas she hoped still remembered her. She was anxious to find out how her childhood friends would react. She came to the Gabon rainforest by boat. When she finally arrived deep in the jungle, she was ready to meet the gorillas. However, what she didn't know was that she was about to reveal something she would never forget. It had been more than 12 years since Tansy had seen her friends. Now she was a bit concerned about whether they would recognize her and if they would have a good reaction to her. However, she had a feeling that everything was going to be all right, and she strongly believed everything would go just the way it should. But little did she know that encountering the gorillas wasn't going to be the only thing she would remember Gabon for. When Tansy came deep into the jungle, her father helped her find the gorillas more easily. They headed towards the place where the gorillas were hanging out. They finally saw them. Djalta and Bims remembered her and ran to meet her. They hugged her, jumped around her, and started becoming a bit vocal to express their excitement. Tansy was so happy, and she could have stayed there forever. However, she had to leave, and when she did, it looked like the gorillas were almost begging Tansy not to leave. Although she loved meeting her childhood friends, Tansy and her father couldn't stay forever in the jungle of Gabon. After a couple of days, Tansy had to say goodbye to Djalta and Bims. She feared that she might not see them again. In the end, you never know what to expect in the wild. But that's not the end of the story about Tansy and her ape friends. Releasing an entire family of apes back into their natural habitat all at once carried enormous risks. Damien was well aware of it. These gorillas didn't spend their entire life in the Gabonese homeland, so there might be plenty of things that could pose risks for them. For instance, eating some poisonous fruit could affect their health, or they could catch a jungle disease they weren't prepared for. But no one could forecast the bad news that Tansy was about to receive just a couple of months after their reunion. The gibbon reserve Djalta and Bims lived in was actually taken care of by a group of people who monitored what happened in the jungles. They could even trace animals through radio transmitters. That's how they discovered terrible news the 2 female gorillas were missing. At first they couldn't find them, but after a couple of days they found their bodies. When they heard the terrible news, Tansy and her father were heartbroken. They couldn't believe they may have grabbed the last chance to meet Tansy's childhood friends. At first they believed that the gorillas were attacked by a leopard, one of the only animals that could take down a fully grown gorilla. But there were no signs of bites or similar wounds, so a leopard couldn't be the culprit. Both gorillas had been battered and beaten in a very forceful way. Most likely the culprit of these deaths was actually another gorilla. Unfortunately, the killer gorilla didn't stop there. Soon after, more gorillas from the same family group were found dead. Another 3 gorillas were dead, and a 4th one was missing. They soon found out that the victims of the gorilla rage were Djalta's 5 wives, as well as a small baby named Akao. The gorillas that died during the attacks were named Tamki, aged 25 Kishi, 16 Mumba, 27 Kibi, 22 and Akao 3. Fufu, 22, was the missing wife. Although it was clear that the killer was another gorilla, everyone wanted to know who precisely was responsible for everything that occurred. They wanted to know if it was a poacher that broke into the reserve. Speculations also arose because some people believed that this could have been done by someone wanting to sabotage the Espinals conservation project. However, it looked like Tansy and her father were the ones that knew the truth about the killer. Apparently, it was a silverback gorilla named Bumanga, one of the gorillas Espinal's facility rescued from cruel captivity. Through no fault of his own, Bumanga wasn't taken care of enough, and as a result of being beaten as a baby, hung upside down, and being kept in a shed, he became psychotic. Tansy and her father are sure that it was his mental damage that incited him to go after other gorillas. Although it is not something he chose to be, Bumanga is a dangerous gorilla that could upset the balance of the jungle. That's why they are looking for proof to determine if he is the real killer or not. If Bumanga is super unpredictable and violent, he might have to be put down. On the other hand, if he is not that violent, then they might have to remove him to some remote corner of the reserve. It was a really tough thing for Tansy and her father. Just when they realized how much their gorilla friends were happy to see them, it seemed like everything fell apart. Probably, Tansy's father will rethink releasing an entire family group at once. The facility will be looking for new ways to ensure the gorillas are safe when they come back to their homeland, and we're sure Damien and Tansy will do their best to provide these gorillas the best life they deserve.